Good morning, students. Today we are going to discuss about the lesson Colonialism and the Countryside. Dear students, in this lesson, we are going to discuss so many things, especially the permanent settlement of land revenue in Bengal and how the Jamindars collect the fixed tax and remit the huge amount to the British East India Company. Next, the lifestyle of the Pahariyas and Santals, and what is the difference between Jamindars and Jotidars, and how the Santals revolt against the Britishers, and the role of the East India Company regarding the permanent settlement. Let us see the first slide, Bengal and the Jamindars. The British colonists of India generally adopted the extant Jamindar system of revenue collection in the north of the country. Let me explain about the Jamindar system. The East India Company fixed a huge amount to the Jamindars, each Jamindars, and in turn the Jamindars have to responsible to collect that fixed amount from the farmers, and they have to remit to the East India Company. This is called Jamindar system. So this is called permanent settlement of land revenue, which was introduced by Lord Cornwallis in the year 1793. Next, auction. Actually, what happened in the Bengal during this time? Some Jamindars became the willful defaulters. So then what happens when they became the willful defaulters? The East India Company took that Jamindari and that liable for the auction. So during that auction, these Jamindars who became the willful defaulter, they sent their fixes and Benami people to purchase that. Okay. So in 1797, there was an auction in Bengal's Burdwan. Okay. So here the Burdwan Maharaj, he willfully became the defaulter and he sent his own people to purchase the Jamindari. Especially they sent. So the palaces were being sold only because Raja had not paid the Jamindari tax in East India Company. The rise of Jotidars. In this lesson, one of the most important segment means part is Jotidars. Who are these Jotidars? What is the difference between the Jamindars and the Jotidars? The Jotidars were the class of rich peasantry in the villages of Bengal, also known as Haloladars or Kantidars in other regions. Okay, one mark, this is very important, children. The main difference between the Jamindars and the Jotidars was that while Jamindars were majority urban residents and in charge of revenue collection for the British, the Jotidars not only used to collect revenue but also were involved in money lending. As they used to reside in the villages, they had a closer hold over the sharecroppers and small farmers, who used to give them a percentage of their crop produce as a part of the revenue. So now let me explain a short. The difference, the most important difference between the Jamindars and Jotidars was the Jotidars used to live in the village, whereas the Jamindars lived out of the village, so that he is having good affinity with the farmers. So whenever the farmers need any money, they used to come to the Jotidars and collect their loan. So sometimes Jotidar they supersede the position of the Jamindars and they occupied that position of the Jamindars. Next, how the Jamindars resist this? The authority of Jamindars in rural areas, however, did not collapse, faced with an extraordinarily high revenue demand and possibly auction of their estates. Okay, so they devised ways of surviving the precious new contest produced in the new strategies. Okay, so Jamindars, they have their own troops, they have their own courts, but gradually the East India Company. So the palaces were being sold only because Raja had not paid the Jamindari tax in East India Company. The rise of Jotidars. In this lesson, one of the most important segment means part is Jotidars. Who are these Jotidars? What is the difference between the Jamindars and the Jotidars? The Jotidars were the class of rich peasantry in the villages of Bengal, also known as Haloladars or Kantidars in other regions. Okay, one mark, this is very important, children. The main difference between the Jamindars and the Jotidars was that while Jamindars were majority urban residents and in charge of revenue collection for the British, the Jotidars not only used to collect revenue but also were involved in money lending. As they used to reside in the villages, they had a closer hold over the sharecroppers and small farmers, who used to give them a percentage of their crop produce as a part of the revenue. So now let me explain a short. The difference, the most important difference between the Jamindars and Jotidars was the Jotidars used to live in the village, whereas the Jamindars lived out of the village. So that he is having good affinity with the farmers. So whenever the farmers need any money, they used to come to the Jotidars and collect their loan. So sometimes Jotidar became, they supersede the position of the Jamindar and they occupied that position of the Jamindars. Next, how the Jamindars resist this? The authority of Jamindars in rural areas, however, did not collapse, faced with an extraordinarily high revenue demand and possibly auction of their estates. Okay, so they devised ways of surviving the pressures new contest produced in the new strategies. Okay, so Jamindars, they have their own troops, they have their own courts, but gradually the East India Company. Let's go to the next slide. The fifth report. Normally, in the East India Company, what happened? Every year they used to send the reporter. So, if you see the fifth report, which was taken place in the year 1813, you see it ran into 1002 pages, of which over 800 pages were appendices that reproduced the petitions of Jamindars and rights. So, in the report, the main focus, the main object of the report was, this report will bring the grievances and problems of the Jamindars and rights before the British Parliament. Okay, so the British Parliament thoroughly examined this report. According to that, they will take the actions. So many groups in Britain were opposed to the monopoly that East India Company had over trade with India and China. Information about the company misrule and maladministration was hotly debated in Britain, and British Parliament passed a series of acts in the late 18th century to regulate and control company rule in India. So the fifth report exaggerated the collapse of traditional Jamindar power and also overestimated the scale on which Jamindar were losing their land. Okay, so this is the very good information for the British Parliament to know the exactly what happened in the rural areas, especially in Bengal. Okay, now we are going to discuss two kind of tribal peoples. One is Ho, another is Flow. The Ho represent the Pahariyas and the Flow represent the Santas. Okay, so that let me explain in brief. So before we are going to discuss about the Pahariyas and Santas, there was one important person we are going to discuss. His name was Francis Buchanan, a physician, had come to India and served in the Bengal Medical Service from 1794 to 1815. He has written a journal in which he described the hills of Rajamahal. The village hill folks of Rajamahal hills were known as Pahariyas. So now we are going to discuss Pahariyas. Who are these Pahariyas? So in his journal, Buchanan mentioned that the people of hills were aggressive and terrorizing. So actually the Pahariyas, the main occupation of the Pahariyas was, they are depending on hunting and forest produce, shifting cultivation by cutting bushes and clearing forest patches and charcoal production and skillworm rearing. They grow millets and pulses for consumption. They collected flowers for food, silk cocoons for sale and wood for charcoal production. So the life of the Pahariyas, the lives of the village folks of Rajamahal were completely connected to the forest. They lived in the hutments within the tamarind groves and restricted under the shades of mango trees. The chiefs maintained the unity of the group and helped in solving disputes. But what happened? The Pahariyas used the hoe and they done the shifting, zooming cultivation, because they can't do the huge land under cultivation. This is the very important point we have to understand. But very soon what happened? The Pahariyas were replaced by Santals. Why? Because the Pahariyas sometimes, if they don't have income, they used to attack the plain areas. They loot and plunder them. So this was very problematic for the down plain areas, Britishers and Jamindars. So the Pahariyas are replaced, means the Britishers and Jamindars introduced another most important tribal people during that time. So they are known as Santals. So before the Santals came to India, India means this Rajamahal hills, the Santals resided in the hills districts of Cuttack, Dalbhum, Manbhum, Bharbhum, Chota Nagpur, Palmau, Midnapur, Bankura and Birbhum. In the Rajamahal Hills, when these Santals are coming and occupying the entry of the Rajamahal Hills, so that the Paharyas went deeper of the Rajamahal Hills. So here one more question is very important. The land demarcated for the Santals known as Daminaiko. Again I am repeating, the land demarcated for the Santals known as Daminaiko. So they engaged in their agrarian way of life by clearing the forest and also hunting for subsistence, but as the agents of the new colonial claimed their rights on the lands of the Santals. They retreated to reside in the hills of Rajamahal. After a brief period, the Britishers operated along with their native counterparts. The local upper caste landlords and the Jamindars jointly started claiming their rights in their new land as well. This is the very important. When the Santals came and with the using of the flower, they brought huge land under agriculture. But after that, the local upper caste landlords and Jamindar, they wanted to occupy that. And they started to exploit the Santals. They started to collect a huge interest for their money. So, because of this reason, what happened, you see, the Santals tribes were turned into bonded laborers. Their wives had been disgraced by the so-called Jamindars. However, Santals tried to repay their loans. They never ended. Because, in fact, the corrupt practices of the money lenders, the compound interest accumulated on the principal amount of the loan multiplied to a large sum. So, the Santals could not bear this injustice. They have taken, for example, 100 rupees, the interest sometimes became 400 for 100 rupees. So, this is very important. Actually, they fight for very important thing for one mark, limitation law. As because of this injustice committed with the Jamindars, the East India Company introduced one law that is called limitation law. As per the limitation law, the bond which the Santals, while they are taking the loan, they have to submit one bond. That bond has 3 years validity. Whatever the bond, loan bond, which they are going to give to the Jamindars while they are taking the loan, that bond is having the validity of 3 years. This is called limitation law. Okay. Now we are going to discuss the Santals rebellion. So the Santals could not digest the injustice which they are going to faced by the Jamindars. So Santals rebellion was a native rebellion in present-day Jharkhand in eastern India against both the British colonial authority and upper caste Jamindar system by the Santal people. On 30th June 1855, two Santal rebel leaders, Sidhu and Kanhu Murmu, mobilized 10,000 Santals and declared a rebellion against the British colonists. So now, we already discussed what was the reason, background of this rebellion. The uprising of the Santals began as a tribal reaction to racism and corrupt usury money lending practices and the Jamindar system. Their operatives in the tribal belt what was known as the Bengal Presidency. Okay, so the oppression, the Jamindars and the upper caste landlords started to exploited the Santals. So this is the reason. So the open rebellion caught the British government in the surprise. A small contingent was sent to suppress the rebels, but it could not succeed, and this further fueled the spirit of the revolt. Very important. Before 1857 revolt, this was the first revolt which was made by the Santals. So the British government had announced an award of rupees 10,000 to arrest Sidhu and his brother Kanhu Murmu. The revolt was brutally crushed. The two celebrated leaders Sidhu and Kanhu were killed during this Santals revolt. The helpings supplied by the Nawab of Murshidabad were used to demolish Santal huts, and it allies in the surprise in the rebellion. Of the 60,000 odd tribesmen who had been mobilized in the rebellion, over 15,000. So very, very tragic fate of the Santals. 15,000 were killed and tens of villages were destroyed. So this is the very important. So conflict, you know the conflict. And eyes of suspicion. Okay. So there is no mutual trust between the Santals and the Britishers, and the emergence of Santals. You know, after that they got some land, whatever the Daminaiko. After the Santal revolt, the remaining Santals used to live in that area. Okay. Now, Deccan. What happened in the countryside? Revolt in the Deccan, right? Especially Pune. So the Saukars, the money lenders, we have taken huge interest for the money. Then due to highly frustrated, these farmers rights attacked the Shaukar houses and looted their houses and burned that bonds which they are hand over to the money lenders at the time of taking the loan. This is also very important. 1875. This is also very important in this lesson. And another most important thing, before I am going to close that was in this lesson, American Civil War 1861 to 65. So very simple, only one line. Due to this 1861-65 American Civil War, a big boom demand for the cotton, because America